Hello fellow Silversaints, how are you doing? My name is Ashley and welcome to the Library of a Silver Saint, where we talk all things books, mainly fantasy, sometimes sci-fi, maybe some lit fic sometimes, a little bit of historical fiction, just everything. Thank you for joining me. I hope you are all doing well. In today's video, I wanted to talk about my top 10 books from 2024. Now, I'm a little bit late to the party with this. I tier ranked my favourite fantasy reads and spoke about some upcoming series that I'm excited for, but I haven't actually spoken about my favourite reads from last year. So this is going to be inclusive of all different genres, so it's not just fantasy and sci-fi. There are going to be other reads on here. In fact, I don't think this list contains any sci-fi, but yes, so I'm just going to be talking you through my top 10 reads of 2024. I am also going to talk about a couple of honourable mentions because there are a couple of books that were really close to making it but didn't quite, but I really wanted to give some time to mention them and briefly talk about them because they still have really stuck with me. I have to apologise in advance because I've got my dog Ernie and then I'm also looking after my mum's dog Ruby, so there may be some dogs walking around in the background. Just apologies for dog spam in the background of the video. Firstly, before I get into the top 10 of my favourite reads of 2024, I have to go over a couple of honourable mentions. There are only two. There were a few more, but I thought, no, I've got to be strict. So I've narrowed it down and I've got two honourable mentions. My first honourable mention for one of my favourite reads of 2024 was A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a beautiful book. Charlotte Neve, who also is here on BookTube and on Bookstagram, is another huge fan of this book. I know it was one of her favourites from last year too, so I'm hoping she'll be really happy to see this. This is a beautiful book. I devoured, no pun intended, this book in a really short period of time. It's incredibly short and it's very, some of the chapters are really short and snappy. Basically, this is almost a Dracula retelling, but rather than it being centred around Dracula, he's not actually named in the book. This is a series of love letters and I guess grief letters written from one of his wives, Constanta, to him. As I say, he's not actually named in the book, but you know that it's him. This is beautiful. It absolutely swept me away to Transylvania. I can't believe it. This is so highlightable, is one thing I would say to describe this book. There were so many passages of just beautiful lyrical prose that I just couldn't help but think, oh, I need to highlight that, I need to highlight that, I need to highlight that. It was absolutely stunning. This is a tale of loss, of longing, of grief, and you really feel for Constanta in this book. Most other sort of Dracula-esque vampire stories kind of glamorise Dracula. Even though he's always the villain, he tends to be glamorised a little bit. And this is not that. This is putting the females, his wives, at the centre of the story and actually their emotions and their journey as characters throughout their relationships with him. And it's really beautiful. It's utterly compelling. It's heartbreaking, but it's just beautifully written. As I say, the most gorgeous lyrical prose. If you like anything to do with vampires or romance and beautiful lyrical writing, please give this a go. Another honourable mention that I don't actually have with me is In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. This is a debut historical fiction novel. I can't believe this is a debut novel. This was beautiful. I did read this quite a while ago, but essentially it is a book that is set in World War I. It is the story of, well, quite a few young men, but mainly centres around two young men who are at boarding school together. They're incredibly close friends, and there's also a few other friends that they're at boarding school with. But this is the story of them as they both end up, for slightly different reasons and in slightly different ways, they end up on the front line in World War I. This was heartbreaking. It was absolutely heartbreaking. Incredibly moving. It was beautifully written. There were little snippets of like newspaper clippings and letters in there that they'd written to one another. It was absolutely stunning. The writing really took me back. I really felt like I was in the trenches at some points with them. It was as I say, utterly compelling. It's a story of love, loss, grief, and also coming to terms with a relationship that is ultimately forbidden, because this is a relationship that is between two young men at the time. As I say, it was absolutely beautifully written, and I can't believe it's a debut. But if you like historical fiction and you haven't read it in memoriam, I would definitely recommend it. Completely random and unrelated also, but I just feel the need to show off my new top. I'm so happy with it. I saw Chris and Mads have both got one, and I just thought, you know what? I think I need that in my life. You know, this is where it began. This is where it began when I was a child, fell in love with Lord of the Rings, fell in love with Aragorn. Just had to show it off. Okay, so now we can get into my actual top 10 reads of 2024. Now, number 10, again, I actually don't have the physical copy of. I read this on my Kindle, I believe. Yes, I read it on my Kindle. And that is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. My goodness, this book is not for the faint-hearted. If you've read any books by Kristen Hanna, you will know that she really packs a punch and really, you know, gives you a whack in the emotions. This is a story of love, but also grief and mental illness as well. So it's set in the 70s. It's based around a family. So you've got a father, his wife, and his daughter. The father is a prisoner of a sort of returned prisoner of war from Vietnam. He fought in Vietnam, and he has been deeply affected by the war that he was in, and his mental health is not good. It's very fractured, and he constantly lives in this fractured state. When he loses his job, he makes an impulsive decision to move his family to Alaska, and they're completely off the grid. They've got a few people nearby, but essentially completely off the grid, and they sort of live in a hut essentially and start living off of the land, and they're incredibly isolated, and winter is approaching, and Ernst, the father, mentally starts to crumble. And this is the story of his wife and his daughter, and him, mainly his wife and his daughter, sort of navigating life with him, going through this incredibly different time as his already fragile mental state is sort of crumbling a little bit more. This book was gripping. The writing of the setting and the scenery of Alaska, I mean, I felt freezing whilst I was reading it. It was incredible. It was utterly compelling, incredibly captivating, and I mean, it absolutely tore my heart out. But we know that I love a sad book. If you've, been seeing any of my stuff that I post, I love a sad book. I love a book that will wreck me. So this did exactly that. If you don't mind a sad book, I would recommend any of Kristen Hanna's books. I've read a couple so far, but this one has really stuck with me. Okay, so at number 9 of my top 10 reads of 2024, we have Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. I've never encountered an author like Fredrik Backman, because he can write just about normal, everyday humans and the human condition and the mundanities of human life in the most beautiful, heartwarming, witty, memorable way. This is essentially a bank robbery, a story of a bank robbery that goes wrong and ends up becoming a hostage situation that also goes wrong. And you've got lots of unlikely, strange characters that are all thrown together into this bizarre scenario that is completely out of the blue. It's the story of how when they communicate, they really find that actually life is quite beautiful. There is good in all people, and there are good in bad moments and things like that. It discusses relationships, love, loss, things like infidelity, divorce. There are also, aspects of things like mental health, mental illness, and losing friends and things like that. It just discusses all of these topics, but in a way that is, at the same time, it's the right balance of light-hearted and witty and funny, but also utterly moving. I couldn't put it down. I love all of Fredrik's books. All of Fredrik's books that I've read so far, I absolutely adore, but actually I think so far this is my favourite of all of them. I want to reread it. I'd like to reread it in 2025, actually. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. Coming in at number 8 is another book that I don't physically own. I say, 10, 9, 8, all of the numbers. Some of these are quite interchangeable. There's no necessary order. This one actually probably should have come a little bit out, but Anyway, I've kind of put it here. But I think it's because it's one of my more recent reads, and also because I plan on re-listening to it again this year. So I listened to this book as an audio, and that is Unruly by David Mitchell. David Mitchell is a British comedian. If you've ever heard of him, I really like him. But he has written a book about the history of Britain's monarchs. Even though a lot of it is based on his opinion, I think, of what happened and his take on things. Obviously, he's gone away and done lots of research, but I think he's got, his opinion of the politics and of the rulers is definitely, heavily involved. But this is mainly a sort of comedy version of talking through it. It kind of reminds me of Horrible Histories, but for adults, written by David Mitchell. That's kind of what I felt when I was listening to it. I loved Horrible Histories when I was young. It's all accurate, but just so funny and accessible. And that's exactly what I found about this. It made Britain's history really fun and really accessible to me. I do often forget a lot of the history and have to kind of reread and re-listen about it, but I would happily re-listen to this. I was in stitches for most of the time. There are parts where I actively sort of rewound 30 seconds to go back and listen again and again and again. David Mitchell has just such a funny way of talking about something that could really be quite dull if written by someone else. If you don't want something that's got a lot of someone's personal opinion involved, then maybe I wouldn't recommend this. But if you would like to learn a bit more about Britain's history in terms of its monarchs and have a real good laugh at the same time, then I highly recommend this. Okay, coming in at number 7 is a book that I have already spoken about before, and that is Slewfoot by Brom. Oh my goodness. This is another book that I would like to reread at some point. This is a witchy, spooky horror, very folklore-esque, which is based in the 1600s in New England in America. So this is centered around a really patriarchal sort of Puritan community in the 1600s, and it centers around this character, Abatha. She's part of this community. She's sort of married into it to her husband, Edward, who is a perfectly nice man. But she's been forced into this marriage. She's been made to marry him. She's perfectly content in her marriage to him. He treats her really well and looks after her. But unfortunately, one day, mysteriously, in an accident, Edward passes away. After this, the whole village completely turns against Abatha, particularly Edward's brother, who kind of enslaves her essentially and treats her awfully. It's at this point where Abatha encounters a character known as Slewfoot, and he's otherwise referred to as the devil. They have a very interesting relationship at first. She's sort of a bit wary of him. She knows what he is. But in this book, Slewfoot, the devil, doesn't actually know what he is. He doesn't know that he's the devil. So that's really interesting. I can safely say I have never read anything like this. Brom's writing is utterly captivating, so compelling. He also illustrated this novel. The illustrations are absolutely haunting, but they're beautiful. As I say, I've never read anything like this before, and I don't think I ever will read anything like this ever again. It was just incredible. Ultimately, this is Abatha's revenge story. It's a good for her story, and I flippin' loved it. I can't say anything else. I flippin' loved it. Essentially, Abatha is branded a witch, and she is treated like she is a witch. And so in her revenge-seeking way, she essentially becomes the witch that they all label her as. And, it's just incredible. This was incredible. Okay, coming in at number 6, we have Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. This is book 1 in his Bound and the Broken series. Now, I chose to talk about Of Blood and Fire because even though I actually think book 2 was stronger, I felt like this was such a good start to the series, and this really invoked a lot of feelings for me that were incredibly nostalgic. Now, this book is essentially, I think, often compared to Eragon. Got a very similar setting, so you've got a vast world. Essentially, you've got many aspects that things like Eragon, Lord of the Rings, etc. all have. So a huge world with lots of different types of characters. So you've got things like elves, dwarves, dragons. Okay, so you've got lots of things. You've got shapeshifters that come a little bit later on, dragon riders, you've got mages. As I say, there's so many similarities to this. This really felt nostalgic to me because of a lot of the aspects that Ryan has put in here. So you've got things like a brotherhood. Well, you've got multiple brotherhoods actually, but brotherhood in terms of really close friendships, also in terms of warriors that used to be bound, relationships between animals as well. So you've got animal companions, you've got a wolf pine in here, who is an incredible animal companion. And then of course you've got dragons. It's you know, it's pretty obvious. You've got some dragons in here, and the relationship between dragon and dragon rider is really interesting, and there's a fun new take on that, which I really enjoy. The world building is incredible. There were moments that really made me smile, the interaction and the dialogue between the characters. This really felt like coming home for me. This just really resembled some of the books that I loved when I was younger, and as the series is going on, it's really becoming its own thing, and Ryan is making this its own series rather than just it feeling like other series. It's a beautiful series. It's epic. Like, it starts to get incredibly gritty. The battles and things that happen a little bit later on, oh my goodness. And some of the things, Ryan is brutal. He's absolutely brutal, but I love it. I love it. I think this is going to be one of my favourite series of all time. Coming in at number 5 is one of my favourite worlds out there. So we're going back to the world of Westeros, and we are with A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. So this is by George R.R. Martin. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is made up of 3 short stories about 2 characters in Westeros, set about 100 to 150 years before the sequence of events that takes place in Game of Thrones occurs. So you have Sir Duncan the Tall, who is a knight, and he's often refers to himself as Dunk the Lunk. He's maybe quite naive and maybe not the smartest person, so he often gets himself into trouble. And then you also have Egg, who is a young boy who's got an interesting family dynamic, shall we say, an interesting background, but I won't go into it. He's a very young boy. He's absolutely tiny. He is actually the intelligent character and the voice of reason in this book, which is such an interesting dynamic. The way they bounce off of each other, it jumps off the page. It's just so heartwarming and cozy, their relationship, and they go on little adventures, little quests. I say little as if that like nothing happens and if it's really cutesy. It's not. These can be really quite brutal. It feels nice to be back in Westeros when it's not all awful because Game of Thrones is pretty dire. That's happening kind of in the background. It's not really at this time, but also in this book, people still remember seeing dragons. So there are people here that still remember seeing dragons being alive and things like that. I just found I couldn't stop smiling when I was reading this. I mean, George R.R. Martin is a master, you know, isn't he? He's a master writer. He's probably the most famous fantasy author for good reason. Coming in at number 4, I'm going to hold up one of the books from the series, but it's not actually this one that I want to talk about. But if I had to pick from the series itself, this would be my favourite. So I'm going to hold up Gemina, which is book 2 in the Illuminae files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. But actually, the book that is my favourite of the series and is actually in place of this is a prequel novella that is set before the sequence of the Illuminae files, and that is called Memento. Memento is a novella that takes place before the events of the Illuminae files, and I listened to it on Audible. It's an incredibly short novella. I think I got through it in a couple of hours. I listened to it in one morning and I could not stop listening. I didn't want to press pause. It was so compelling. The characters, even though you only know them for such a short period of time in this, were so gripping. They really leapt off the page. They were funny. They had incredible dynamics. The dialogue is what really carried this book. You don't need to think about world building and everything, because at this point you probably have already read Illuminae, because normally I think people read it after they've read book 1. So you don't really have to worry about that. This is really a dialogue heavy book. This novella really centres on my favourite character from the Illuminae files, which is Aidan, which is an AI, which his whole his whole sort of purpose is to protect people that are on board his vessels. Essentially, he starts to go wrong, and you end up getting this really crazy, kind of fucked up AI. His voice is like nothing I've ever heard before. Every time I listen to him, even though he makes the most wild decisions and says the most crazy things, it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense, and you're listening to it, and it blew my mind. Essentially, in this book, Aidan meets the trolley problem and tries to reason with the trolley problem, with the person that he is talking to. And this person is watching him generally start to crash and potentially become quite deadly. But he is reasoning with her using the trolley problem. The trolley problem essentially discusses whether it is moral to sacrifice one life to potentially save others, or save one life and potentially harm others. And it sort of justifies that. The amount of times that Aidan's dialogue and his reasoning and just his voice had my jaw on the floor, I can't tell you. He's one of my favourite characters that I've ever read from any book. And it sounds bad because he is pretty fucked up, but he's unforgettable, and that's what I love about him. He's so intelligent, but also wicked. It's just, oh my goodness, you have to read the Illuminae Files. As a whole, the series is incredible, but that novella really stood out for me, just in terms of how it was able to pack such a punch, being such a short book. Someone's going to have to stop me at some point, because number 3 is also by J. Kristoff. So I have chosen God's Grave, which is book 2 in the Nevernight Chronicles. The Nevernight Chronicles, I read all 3 books in 2024, and I absolutely adored every single one of them. They were incredible. But book 2, God's Grave, really stood out to me. So the Nevernight Chronicles is based around a character called Mia Corvair. She's a young girl. You see her as a child, and I mean, she's always essentially a child in the first book, especially sort of from younger child to sort of teenager, and she essentially is on a quest of revenge and to get vengeance against the people that destroyed her family. This book is set in a kind of, or these books, sorry, are set in a kind of Roman inspired world, and then book 2, God's Grave, is centered in more of like a gladiator inspired world. They refer to them as gladiati in this book, and if you've seen Gladiator or love Gladiator, then I think you would enjoy this book out of the 3 especially. So Mia essentially is trained in the first book to be an assassin in something that is known as the Red Church. She also has these really cool abilities, so she's what's known as a Darkin, which means that she can essentially play about and move with shadows, which makes her a really efficient assassin. Gives her the ability to do really cool things. She also has, well, in these books, you've also got essentially sort of animal companions, but they're in the form of demons. You've got Mia's companion, Mr. Kindly, who's a shadow cat. And then you've also got this guy, which is Eclipse, which is more like a wolf. And essentially they feed on the person that they are attached to. They feed on their fear. In this book, we're continuing to follow Mia as she is trying to find the people that destroyed her family, and she's trying to get her revenge on them. She suspects that something is in the Red Church. She suspects something is going on there, and so in order to sort of move forward and find the people that destroyed her family, she ends up sacrificing herself essentially to become a gladiati to fight in this arena. And the action and the battles that take place in this book are just so cool. And also I felt a lot more connected to the characters in this book as well. You get some new characters that are introduced that end up going into book 3 as well. And they're just incredible. I love all of them together. This book also has J. Kristoff's sort of witty, dark humour, his sarcasm. It's just incredible. There are moments that absolutely broke my heart, but mostly I found myself smiling or just with my jaw on the floor because he'd done something completely outrageous. There is also a sort of narrator in this book. So each book has got like footnotes at the bottom of the page, which add to the world building and the lore. You don't have to read them, I guess, if you don't want to, but I absolutely loved reading them. I really felt that approaching the world building in this way, it really added to the whole experience for me, and I absolutely loved it. This book, this series is incredible, but book 2 just really, wow, it floored me in the best possible way. And the ending to this, Jay, I'm still not okay. I'm still not okay. I'm still not okay. I'm still not over it. I finished the series, but I'm still not over the ending to this one. This is an excellent series, and if you haven't read it, get onto it. Also, it's got a little bit of spice in there as well. In some scenes, I was like, whoa, you know, I would be thinking, oh God, I hope someone's not reading over my shoulder or anything. And I'm really bad when I'm reading spice. I get really I blush and I get flushed. And yeah, I just like, oh God, I'm really British about it. So yeah, I highly recommend these books, and this one was incredible. I've been talking for so long, I need to stop. But coming in at number 2, oh my God, we have Ruin, which is book 3 in the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. I'm getting teary just thinking of it. This series is the first book series I've ever read, ever, that has moved me to tears. Ever. That's saying something. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I could be here for so long. I am planning on doing a deep dive at some point into this series because this is one of my favourite series of all time. The Faithful and the Fallen series is essentially this huge epic about a you've got the sort of chosen one hero's journey, okay, which centres around our main character, Corbin, and it's set in a place called the Banished Lands. You've got a sort of angels and demons, gods, sort of war going on, and Corbin becomes involved in this along with many other characters. And you've got just so many aspects of this book, of these books as a whole, that I just adore. You've got incredible animal companions, you've got found friendship, the most gorgeous friendships and relationships. I can't, it's too good. And I love how John Gwynne writes his animal companions in this. They are like humans. It's incredible. I never thought I would have such strong feelings for a crow. But now a crow is one of my favourite animals ever. It's because of John Gwynne. You've got also things like giants, and you've got these giant lizards, which I think are called drags, which people will ride. You've got a sort of prophecy that is going on, and it's kind of unravelling. You've got the most incredible battle scenes that I've ever read in my life. They are like a movie scene playing in your brain. I literally felt like I was in the middle. I don't know why I did an air grab there. I'm not like in an 80s music video. I don't know. Don't ask. I felt like I was in the middle. That's better. In the middle of those scenes with like spears and arrows going over me. The most memorable characters I've ever encountered, ever. I love them. You know, you've got the heroes and the good characters that you just are so rooting for. And I felt like the love for them, like deep in my heart and in my soul. I was like, oh, I want them to succeed. I love them all. And then you've got these just foul villains that you just hate because they're grotesque and just disgusting and awful. And you just hate them so much and you want them to die. I'm so morbid. And then you've got really frustrating characters that go on really incredible arcs, and the whole time you're reading about them, you're just like, oh God, I can't cope with them because it's so frustrating what they're going through, but you really want the best for them ultimately. I can't describe in under 5 minutes how this feels. The world building is incredible. You've got just this epic world with all of these different lands. John's writing just completely swept me away. But again, similarly to The Bound and the Broken, I also got that real sort of nostalgic feeling while reading this. It really felt like coming home. This is my absolute, I dare I say it, this is my comfort. This feels like home. Sometimes quite a horrible home, but it genuinely feels like home to me. This is just incredible. I specifically have book 3, Ruin, focus on the title here, because of the way it ruined me at the ending. It really did ruin me. It was, John, I still haven't forgiven you, to be honest. I still haven't forgiven you. The ending of this floored me. I had to go straight into book 4, Wrath, to get over it. That didn't help much either, but still, This one, all 4 of them are astonishing. Best books I've ever read. So thank you, John, for writing this series, because I'm never going to forget it, and I can't wait to reread at some point. Okay, I hate to sound like a broken record, and so many people are going to know this before I even show it, but hear me out. For the 3rd time on this list today, we have Mr. J. Kristoff, because my number 1, my best book of 2024 was Empire of the Vampire. Now, I decided in this video that I would only talk about 1 book per series, but if not, then maybe book 2, Empire of the Damned, would also have been on this list. At this point, this book is my entire personality. It's all I think about. It's mostly all I talk about. This book is everything to me. I can't. I'm going to be doing a deep dive at some point of this series, but just to give you a bit of a brief, if I can keep it brief, overview. This series, because this is book 1, and it's not completed yet, we're waiting for book 3, it's coming out in November, Empire of the Dawn. I'm so excited. This is set in an epic world called Elydian, and unfortunately, due to some awful thing that's happened, some sort of natural disaster, we have something called day's death, which means that the sun has not risen properly in 27 years. So it means that in this world, vampires are able to rise, and their empire has grown. They are able to terrorize people, technically as often as they want, during the day, during the night, whenever, because they are not being threatened by the sunlight. In this book, we have some of my favourite characters of all time. My favourite protagonist, a very morally grey, as I like, it's my favourite thing, very morally grey character, Gabriel de Leon, who is the last Silver Saint of Saint Michon. Essentially, he is a vampire hunter, a vampire killer, and he is currently in prison. So he is telling his story whilst he is in prison to a vampire historian, Jean-Francois, who is gathering all of the details about Gabriel's life. So this book is set in sort of dual timelines. So you've got a couple of different timelines. You've got the present day where Gabriel is telling his story, and then you've got his past, sort of his childhood and his encounters with vampires as a child. And then you've got him training to be a vampire assassin, essentially, and training to be a Silver Saint. So he's going about that and talking about that. And then a huge aspect of this book is that he is seeking the one thing that can hopefully save the world from day's death and end day's death, which is the Holy Grail. And he is talking about his journey in terms of finding and seeking the Holy Grail. One thing I absolutely love about this book, besides the premise about things like day's death, I mean, it's just an incredible premise, but I loved Jay's take on vampires. They felt so real to me. You know, I know that Twilight was an interesting new take on vampires, you know, them being glittery and all that, but this really felt as true as it can be, as in talking about vampires. It felt weirdly authentic and original, but in a new, refreshing way. The vampires in this are beautiful and seductive, and they speak in sort of like a very old historic tongue. It's just, I thought they were written and described absolutely beautifully. Also in this, you have the most incredible characters. Gabriel himself is an incredible character, but then you have a few other characters as well who are just, oh my goodness. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I know I'll give something away. And if you haven't read this, you absolutely need to. But the characters are incredible. The dialogue is unforgettable. Jay has the most odd way of writing but it works perfectly, in my opinion. He has the most beautiful lyrical prose, which just sweeps you away into another world and then kind of slaps you in the face with some really witty, sarcastic profanity. And it works. I can't describe it in any other way, but it just worked so well for me. So at some points I was completely whisked away by his beautiful writing, and then at other points I was laughing out loud because it's just hilarious. He also writes, in my opinion, the best kind of romance for me, which is where it's not, you know, everything about the book, but it's there and it is a fundamental aspect of it. But he writes it in what I believe is an incredibly realistic way. There is a bit of smut in here, and it was steamy. I was I was being swooned. I often describe J. Kristoff as a silver-tongued devil because it's what he is. The relationships and the smut in here, it's beautiful. I stand by that. It is absolutely beautiful. There was genuine sexual chemistry, genuine romance in here. Oh, with his writing, I highlighted so much of this book. But also an incredible aspect about these books is the illustrations. So each book has these incredible illustrations. They are stunning. Look at that. And it's not just special editions or anything like that. Every copy has this, so even on Kindle you get to see the illustrations. That's one thing I would say about physically reading it. I haven't listened to it yet. I do plan on listening to it when I reread it later this year in preparation for book 3 to come out, but I would recommend having a physical copy just so that you can see the illustrations. They are absolutely beautiful. Another aspect that I would say about this is, of course, you've got an incredible character in this, which is a sentient sword. So Gabe has a sentient sword called Ash Drinker. She has her own voice, and it's just the little things like the inclusion of her and her dialogue and things that she says and does is just incredible. I'm actually getting an Ash Drinker tattoo later this year. I'm so excited. I can't fully encompass my love for this book and this series. It's honestly, it's everything to me. It's completely changed my life. It's changed my reading experience forever. I would genuinely get multiple lines of this tattooed on my body. I feel like every time Jay wrote a new sentence, every sentence is quotable. Like they're beautiful. Like they will go down in history. I'm just going to look at my laptop because I've written down a couple of the quotes, but I just have to read them to you. One is, put a man in a room for 100 years with 1,000 books and he'll know a million truths. Put him in a room for a year with silence and he'll know himself. They just floor me. If we spend all our lives in darkness, is it any wonder when darkness starts to live in us? He's so right. Another favourite, my friends are the hill I die on. Oh, I love him. And this one gets me every time. But you're not a weak and foolish girl. No, I'm a fucking queen. Oh, I just love it. I also love how Jay writes women. That is one thing I adore about him, is he writes the most powerful, intelligent, and just impeccable women. He just writes women so well. I adore him. As I say, I'm going to do a deep dive at some point into this series because, as I say, it's basically my whole personality and all I think about. I'm not going to apologise for it. I adore it. But this is my favourite series of all time, and at the moment, this is my favourite book of all time. I know that may change at some point, but at the moment I can't see it happening. But if you have not read Empire of the Vampire, please get to it. It is just incredible. I've heard it described as Marmite, but personally, I couldn't see it as that. And J. Kristoff is obviously my favourite author because of it. So yeah, there's my number one. Okay, so thank you so much for sticking with me. That was really long and I apologise. Well, actually, I kind of don't. I don't apologise. They're great books. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it took ages, so thanks for sticking with me. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. And if you would like to join the Library of a Silversaint and you would like to subscribe, I would be so grateful because then you'll see anything that I upload and I'd really appreciate that. If you agree with me on any of my choices, my top 10 books of 2024, please let me know down in the comments. If you disagree with me, again, please let me know as well. I want to know if there were any that you weren't so keen on. And also if you have any suggestions for me, please pop them down in the comments. But I hope you have a really great day. And again, thank you so much for watching.